In the summer of 1942, something extraordinary was happening in the North African desert. Small columns of modified American jeeps were racing across hundreds of miles of open sand, slipping past German and Italian positions and appearing out of nowhere to attack enemy airfields with devastating effect. A handful of men in these vehicles claimed to have destroyed more Axis aircraft than the Royal Air Force managed through conventional air combat during the same period, and they nearly never existed at all. The Special Air Service, founded in July 1941 by a 25-year-old lieutenant on crutches, began as one of the most audacious gambles in British military history. A unit of fewer than 70 men proposed to achieve what entire brigades could not. The SAS's North African campaign, spanning from its catastrophic first operation in November 1941 to David Stirling's capture in January 1943, claimed destruction of an estimated 250 to 400 enemy aircraft. While these figures remain disputed against German records, what is undeniable is that the unit forced Rommel to divert precious frontline troops to guard rear area airfields. The unit that British military bureaucrats actively wanted to fail became the template for every modern special forces organization in the Western world. The story of how this happened is also the story of a vehicle, not a British vehicle at all, but an American one. The Willys Jeep, designed in Toledo, Ohio, as a simple general-purpose runabout, would be transformed by British ingenuity into the deadliest desert raider of the Second World War. But to understand how that transformation occurred, we must first understand the men who made it happen and the desperate circumstances that gave birth to their unit. By the summer of 1941, the British position in North Africa was precarious. The Desert Fox, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, had arrived in Libya in February with his Afrika Korps and immediately begun pushing British forces back toward Egypt. The garrison at Tobruk was besieged. The Royal Air Force was struggling to maintain air superiority over the Libyan airfields from which German and Italian aircraft launched attacks on Allied shipping and troops. Something had to change, and it would take an unconventional mind to see what that something might be. David Stirling was, by most conventional measures, a terrible soldier. Born on the 15th of November 1915 in London, at 15 Cambridge Square, to a Scottish aristocratic family, he was the son of Brigadier General Archibald Stirling of Keir. The family seat, Keir House in Perthshire, was where he spent his childhood, but London was his birthplace. Educated at Ampleforth College and sent down from Cambridge University, after a year of drinking and gambling, he stood 6 feet 5 inches tall, with the build of the mountaineer he had trained to become before the war, interrupted his plans to climb Everest. Stirling had joined the Scots Guards Supplementary Reserve in 1937 and served with No. 8 Guards Commando under Colonel Robert Laycock as part of Layforce. But his military record was far from distinguished. He had nearly been charged with malingering, and his superior officers viewed him with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. When Layforce was disbanded on the 1st of August 1941, after suffering heavy casualties during the evacuation of Crete, Stirling was recovering in a Cairo hospital from a spinal injury sustained during an experimental parachute jump. The jump had gone badly wrong, and Stirling had spent weeks unable to walk, lying in a hospital bed with nothing to do but think. It was during this enforced convalescence that Stirling crystallized his radical insight. He had seen how conventional commando raids operated. Large forces of 200 or more men would be assembled, transported by ship or aircraft to their objective, and then deployed in mass attacks. The operations were complex, required enormous coordination, and were easily detected. The enemy had learned to watch for them. Raid after raid was cancelled at the last moment when surprise was lost, and when raids did proceed, casualties were often severe. Stirling argued the opposite approach. He believed that small teams of 4 to 5 men, operating with stealth and mobility across the vast, unguarded desert flanks, could destroy more aircraft and supplies than an entire commando unit operating together. The key insight was the desert itself. Unlike the European theatre, where front lines were continuous, the North African campaign featured enormous gaps in the lines. The desert was simply too vast to garrison completely. Small teams could slip through these gaps, travel hundreds of miles undetected, strike their targets, and disappear back into the sand sea before the enemy even knew they had been there. Stirling composed a memorandum outlining this concept in precise detail. He proposed a unit of roughly 200 men, organized into small detachments who would be trained in demolitions, desert navigation, and survival. They would strike airfields, supply dumps, and communication lines deep behind enemy positions. The targets would be so far from the front that they would be virtually unguarded. The cumulative effect of repeated small-scale attacks would be crippling to enemy morale and logistics. The problem was getting anyone to read his memorandum. Sterling was a junior lieutenant, barely recovered from injury, with a reputation for indiscipline. The senior officers at Middle East headquarters had more pressing concerns than listening to unconventional ideas from subalterns who couldn't even complete a parachute jump without hurting themselves. The traditional account of what happened next has become legendary. It holds that Sterling, still on crutches, bluffed and climbed his way past sentries at Middle East headquarters in Cairo, slipping under a gap in the perimeter fence when guards refused him entry. Moving as quickly as his injured back would allow, he made his way into the headquarters building and stumbled into the office of Major General Neil Ritchie, Deputy Chief of Staff. Before anyone could throw him out, he handed over his memorandum. Historian Gavin Mortimer's 2022 biography presents a different version. Mortimer argues it was actually Sterling's elder brother Bill, already working at headquarters in a staff position, who ensured the proposal reached the right desks. The truth may involve elements of both accounts. What matters is that Ritchie read the memorandum, found its logic compelling, and championed the idea to General Sir Claude Auchinleck, the newly appointed Commander-in-Chief Middle East Forces. Auchinleck was under intense pressure from Prime Minister Winston Churchill to mount an offensive against Rommel. He needed results, and he was willing to consider unconventional approaches that might deliver them. 3 days after receiving Sterling's memorandum, Auchinleck met the young lieutenant personally, promoted him to captain on the spot, and authorized the recruitment of 6 officers and 60 men. The unit was designated L Detachment, Special Air Service Brigade. The name was a deliberate piece of deception, and understanding it reveals something important about the fog of war that made the SAS possible. Brigadier Dudley Clark was running a sophisticated deception operation called A Force from Cairo. One of his schemes was the creation of a Phantom K Detachment, Special Air Service Brigade, complete with fake unit insignia, doctored photographs, and deliberately leaked intelligence. The purpose was to convince the Axis that a full 5,000-man British parachute brigade existed in North Africa, ready to drop behind Rommel's lines at any moment. The Phantom unit was so convincing that it had already caused the Germans to divert troops and aircraft to counter a threat that did not exist. Sterling's real unit became L Detachment, implying the existence of detachments A through K. The fictional element was designated K Detachment, making Sterling's tiny force appear to be just one component of a much larger formation. It was deception layered upon deception, and it bought the SAS precious room to operate in its vulnerable early days. But if Auchinleck had authorized the unit's creation, the middle and lower ranks of Middle East headquarters had not. Staff officers were openly hostile. Bureaucrats tried to block Sterling's recruitment of officers from the disbanded lay force. They refused to provide adequate equipment, supplies, or transport. Every request was delayed, denied, or simply ignored. The SAS's first operation became a theft. Sterling and his men raided a nearby New Zealand regiment's camp, stealing tents, bedding, and even a piano to furnish their new headquarters at Cobrit, a desolate camp on the Great Bitter Lake. Staff officers at headquarters were described as actively wanting the SAS to fail, hoping its inevitable collapse would vindicate their opposition and prevent future unconventional units from disrupting the proper order of military hierarchy. Sterling would later describe these officers with characteristic bluntness as fossilized. The men Sterling recruited were a remarkable collection of misfits, adventurers, and natural warriors. They came from disbanded commando units, from the long-range desert group, from regular infantry battalions where their independent thinking had made them unwelcome. What they shared was a willingness to volunteer for missions that promised extreme danger with uncertain reward. The training program that awaited them at Cobrit was devised not by Sterling, but by a man who, by Sterling's own admission, was far more genuinely the founder of the SAS. Lieutenant John Steele Lewis, known universally as Jock, was born on the 21st of December 1913 in Calcutta, India, where his father worked as a chartered accountant. Raised in Australia and educated at Christ Church, Oxford, where he was president of the University Boat Club and rode for the Oxford 8. Lewes was an intellectual, an athlete, and a natural leader who had joined the Welsh Guards before transferring to commandos. Where Stirling provided the political vision and the social connections needed to keep the unit alive in the face of bureaucratic opposition, Lewes built everything else. He designed the training program, a punishing regimen of desert survival, weapons handling, demolitions, and celestial navigation that would transform civilian soldiers into silent killers, capable of operating for weeks behind enemy lines. He established the principle that every SAS man must be trained in every skill, so that a team could continue to function even after suffering casualties. He instilled the discipline and attention to detail that would mean the difference between life and death in the desert. Most importantly, Lewes invented the weapon that made the SAS effective. Existing demolition charges were poorly suited to destroying aircraft. Standard explosives would blow holes in fuselages but often left aircraft repairable. Incendiary devices could start fires but might not destroy the target completely. The SAS needed something that would both detonate and burn, ensuring that every aircraft attacked was completely destroyed. After weeks of experimentation, Lewes developed his solution. The Lewes bomb consisted of roughly 1 pound of plastic explosive, designated Nobel 808, mixed with approximately a quarter-pound of thermite and bound with diesel oil. Additional components included steel filings and a 2-ounce dry gun cotton booster with a 30-second time delay fuse. The complete device weighed about 1 pound, small enough that a single man could carry a dozen of them. When detonated, the explosive would rupture fuel tanks, while the thermite would ignite the aviation fuel, ensuring complete destruction. It was elegant, portable, and devastatingly effective. Every aircraft killed by the SAS in their foot-borne raids was killed by a Lewes bomb. The third founding member of what would become the SAS's wartime leadership was as different from the aristocratic Stirling and the intellectual Lewes as it was possible to be. Blair Robert Mayne was born on the 11th of January 1915 in Newtownards, County Down, in what was then Ireland. The son of a prosperous family, he had become a qualified solicitor, but his true calling was violence, the controlled violence of sport and the uncontrolled violence of combat. Mayne was the Irish University's heavyweight boxing champion. He won 6 international rugby caps for Ireland, playing as a lock forward between February 1937 and March 1939. In 1938, he toured South Africa with the British and Irish Lions, earning 3 test caps. He stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 217 pounds, most of it muscle. His fellow soldiers called him Paddy, and they approached him with a mixture of admiration and wariness. Mayne had a temper, and when it was roused, the results were memorable. He was recruited into the SAS, reportedly from a prison cell, where he was awaiting court-martial for striking his commanding officer. The circumstances of the incident varied depending on who told the story. But the essential fact was that Mayne had been facing the end of his military career when Stirling appeared with an offer of redemption. Mayne would become the SAS's greatest warrior. But in those early days at Cobreat, he was simply one more recruit, learning to plant Lewes bombs and navigate by the stars. The SAS's first combat operation was launched on the night of the 16th to 17th of November, 1941, in support of Operation Crusader, the major British offensive intended to relieve the besieged garrison at Tobruk. The plan, codenamed Operation Squatter, called for 55 men in 5 sticks to parachute from Bristol Bombay aircraft onto drop zones near 5 Axis airfields at Gazala and Timimi. They would plant Lewes bombs on parked aircraft, then march 50 miles south through the desert to rendezvous with the long-range desert group, who would transport them back to friendly lines. The weather forecast was atrocious. Meteorologists predicted gale-force winds of 30 knots, twice the safe limit for parachuting. Stirling faced an impossible choice. If he cancelled the operation, headquarters would use the failure to justify disbanding the unit before it had accomplished anything. If he proceeded, his men might be scattered across the desert, unable to reach their targets or their extraction point. Stirling chose to proceed. The 5 stick leaders were Stirling himself, Paddy Mayne, Jock Lewes, Lieutenant Earl McGonigal, and Lieutenant Charles Bonington. They boarded their aircraft on the evening of the 16th of November and flew out over the desert toward the enemy airfields. What followed was a catastrophe. The winds reached force 7 to 8, driving a massive sandstorm that reduced visibility to nearly zero. Pilots flew blind, unable to see the ground or their drop zones. One aircraft, carrying Lieutenant Bonington and his men, was shot down by a German Messerschmitt night fighter. The others dropped their parachutists as best they could, but the howling wind scattered men and equipment across miles of desert. Equipment containers, carrying the precious Luz bombs, were torn from their parachutes and lost. Explosives that were recovered had been soaked by rain that had preceded the sandstorm. Men landed miles from their intended drop zones, their navigation equipment damaged or missing. Squads that managed to assemble found themselves hopelessly lost, their targets unreachable before dawn would expose them to enemy aircraft. Not a single shot was fired at the enemy that night. Not a single Lewis bomb detonated on an Axis aircraft. Of the 55 men who had jumped, only 21 or 22 straggled back to the long-range Desert Group rendezvous point over the following days. Lieutenant McGonigal died of injuries sustained during his landing. The rest were dead, captured, or lost in the desert. Operation Squatter was a complete and total failure. Any reasonable assessment would have concluded that the SAS experiment was over. Sterling's theories had been tested against reality, and reality had won. The sensible course would be to distribute the surviving men back to their original units and forget that L detachment had ever existed. The staff officers at Middle East headquarters certainly expected this outcome and were already preparing to process the unit's disbandment. But during the long, slow journey back from the disaster in the long-range Desert Group's Chevrolet trucks, Sterling was not thinking about failure. He was thinking about the trucks themselves. If the long-range Desert Group could extract his men from deep in the desert, why couldn't they insert them? The parachute drop had failed because of uncontrollable weather. Vehicle insertion would eliminate that variable entirely. Sterling approached Captain David Lloyd Owen, commander of the long-range Desert Group patrol that had rescued his men, with a proposal. The long-range Desert Group had been operating deep in enemy-held territory since 1940, running reconnaissance missions and occasionally attacking targets of opportunity. They knew the desert better than anyone. What if they transported SAS raiding parties to within striking distance of enemy airfields, dropped them off, and returned to pick them up after the attack? Lloyd Owen agreed to present the idea to his commander, and the long-range Desert Group's leadership agreed to a trial. Just 1 month after the disaster of Operation Squatter, on the 14th of December 1941, the SAS launched its first successful operations. 3 raiding parties were transported by long-range Desert Group vehicles to points near enemy airfields, then proceeded on foot to their targets. The results exceeded everyone's expectations except possibly Sterling's. Paddy Mayne led his team against Tamet Airfield, approaching through the darkness on foot until they reached the perimeter. What happened next demonstrated why Mayne would become the most feared commando of the North African campaign. Finding the officers' mess still lit and occupied, Mayne burst through the door, surprising approximately 30 Axis airmen at dinner. He opened fire with his pistol, then withdrew, and began systematically moving through the parked aircraft, planting Lewis bombs on each one. The SAS claimed 24 aircraft destroyed at Tamet that night, with 0 British casualties. When Mayne ran out of explosives before he ran out of targets, he reportedly climbed into the cockpit of one remaining aircraft and tore the instrument panel out with his bare hands, ensuring it would never fly again. On the 21st to 22nd of December, Lieutenant Bill Fraser's 5-man team hit Agadabia Airfield, further into Axis territory. The SAS claimed up to 37 aircraft destroyed, though German records examined after the war indicate the actual number was closer to 25. The discrepancy between SAS claims and Axis records would become a recurring theme, but even the lower number represented a remarkable achievement for 5 men with no support. Across multiple raids that December, the SAS claimed approximately 60 enemy aircraft destroyed without a single man killed in action. The concept that staff officers had dismissed as impossible was proven. General Auchinleck promoted Sterling to major and authorized expansion of the unit, but success carried its own price. On the 31st of December 1941, Jock Lewis was returning from a raid on Nophelia Airfield in a long-range Desert Group truck when the convoy was spotted by a German aircraft. A Messerschmitt 110 made repeated strafing runs on the exposed vehicles. A 20mm cannon round struck Lewis in the leg, severing his femoral artery. He bled to death in 4 minutes, surrounded by men who had no way to stop the hemorrhage. He was 28 years old. Lewis's death was a devastating blow. He had been the intellectual architect of everything that made the SAS function, and his loss was felt deeply by every man who had trained under him. But the machine he had built continued to operate. His training methods, his tactical doctrines, and his Lewis bombs remained, passed down to the men who would continue to carry out the mission he had designed. In the months that followed, the SAS conducted raid after raid against enemy airfields and installations. They became utterly dependent on the long-range desert group for transportation, and this dependency was both a strength and a limitation. The long-range desert group's Chevrolet 30 hundredweight trucks, nicknamed the Libyan Desert Taxi Service by the men they carried, were reliable and capable of covering enormous distances. But the long-range desert group had its own critical missions, particularly the road watch, continuous surveillance of the Via Balbia coastal highway to track Axis troop and supply movements. Scheduling conflicts became increasingly problematic. Different mission profiles meant that long-range desert group commanders sometimes refused to transport SAS raiders to targets they considered too dangerous or too far from their own areas of operation. And the simple loss of operational independence grated on Sterling, who believed the SAS should control its own destiny. The solution emerged gradually. Before acquiring jeeps, Sterling reclaimed a rolled Ford station wagon from a salvage depot in Cairo. The vehicle had been written off after an accident, but Sterling's men stripped off its damaged roof, mounted Vickers K machine guns on improvised mounts, and painted it in desert camouflage. They christened it the Blitz Buggy, and though it was unreliable and prone to mechanical failure, it gave the SAS its first taste of vehicle independence. The real transformation came in June 1942, when the SAS acquired its first batch of American Willys Jeeps. These vehicles had been arriving in North Africa in increasing numbers as part of Lend-Lease shipments, and they were proving themselves remarkably capable in desert conditions. By July, at Paddy Mayne's urging, Sterling returned to Cairo to procure a larger consignment. Through a combination of official requisitions and the unofficial acquisition methods at which the SAS had become expert, the unit soon possessed approximately 16 jeeps and 20 Bedford 3-ton supply trucks, making them fully independent of long-range desert group transport. But the standard Willys Jeep was not a weapon of war. It was a utility vehicle, designed to carry personnel and light cargo. Transforming it into a desert raiding platform required modifications that would have astonished the engineers in Toledo who had designed it. The SAS drew heavily on techniques pioneered by Major Ralph Bagnold, the founder of the Long-Range Desert Group and one of the foremost desert exploration experts in the world. Bagnold had spent years before the war traveling the Sahara, learning its secrets, and developing the equipment needed to survive and operate in its harsh environment. The first step was weight reduction. Canvas roofs, wind screens, doors, and any non-essential sheet metal were stripped from each Jeep. Every pound removed was a pound that didn't need to be carried across the sand, extending range and improving performance in soft terrain. Bagnold water condensers were fitted to the cooling system. These ingenious devices captured steam escaping from the radiator, condensed it in an external can, and returned the water to the system via vacuum pressure. In the furnace heat of the desert, a standard vehicle could lose gallons of coolant to evaporation. The Bagnold condenser eliminated this problem, allowing vehicles to operate for hundreds of miles without needing to top up their radiators. Steel sand channels, another Bagnold innovation, were strapped to the sides of each Jeep. When a vehicle became stuck in soft sand, which happened frequently, these perforated metal tracks could be placed under the wheels to provide traction for extraction. Navigation required special equipment. Standard magnetic compasses were unreliable near vehicle metal, and in the featureless desert where there were no landmarks to check against. Bagnold sun compasses, which consisted of a graduated shadow disc with a vertical needle, provided accurate directional readings regardless of magnetic interference. The navigator would set the disc according to the time of day and the sun's position, then maintain course by keeping the needle's shadow on the correct bearing. At night, navigation shifted to the stars, using techniques that Jock Lewis had incorporated into SAS training. The most critical modification addressed the Jeep's limited range. The standard fuel tank held 15 gallons, which provided less than 120 miles of travel in desert sand, where fuel consumption increased dramatically. This was completely inadequate for deep penetration raids that might require traveling 400 miles or more behind enemy lines. Jerry can racks were welded to rear mudguards and bonnet, creating capacity for 8 to 12 additional 5-gallon fuel cans. This expanded total fuel capacity to over 60 gallons, extending range past 400 miles. Similar racks carried water cans and spare parts. By the time all modifications were complete, each Jeep resembled a mechanical pack mule more than a military vehicle. But it was the armament that made the SAS Jeep truly deadly. The key weapon was the Vickers K machine gun, also known as the Vickers gas-operated. This weapon had originally been designed as an observer's gun for Royal Air Force bombers, intended to be fired by rear gunners against attacking enemy fighters. When belt-fed Browning machine guns replaced the Vickers K in aircraft service, large numbers became available as surplus. The Vickers K's characteristics made it nearly ideal for hit-and-run ground warfare. Chambered in .303 caliber, the same as the standard British rifle, it could fire at an adjustable rate between 950 and 1200 rounds per minute, significantly faster than the standard German infantry machine gun. It was fed by 100-round flat-pan magazines that could be changed quickly. The complete weapon weighed just 29.5 pounds, light enough to be handled by a single operator. Most importantly for desert operations, the Vickers K's low-friction locking mechanism proved remarkably resistant to the sand that jammed and disabled other automatic weapons. A Vickers K could be fired reliably even when coated with the fine dust that penetrated everything in the desert environment. The standard SAS Jeep configuration mounted twin Vickers K guns forward on the passenger side and twin Vickers K guns on a swivel mount at the rear. This gave a single vehicle 4 rapid-fire weapons capable of producing a withering volume of fire. Some Jeeps also carried a .50 caliber Browning heavy machine gun at the rear for additional hitting power against armored targets or defensive positions. When loaded with a mixture of tracer, incendiary, and armor-piercing ammunition, these weapons could tear apart parked aircraft in seconds. Tracer rounds allowed gunners to adjust their aim in the darkness. Incendiary rounds ignited aviation fuel on contact. The combination was spectacularly destructive. The first test of vehicle-mounted tactics came during the Bagush airfield raid on the night of the 7th to 8th of July 1942. Maine's team infiltrated the airfield on foot as usual and began planting Lewis bombs on parked aircraft. They placed charges on approximately 40 planes before discovering a problem. About half the bomb primers were damp, probably from condensation during the desert night, and failed to detonate. Only 22 aircraft were destroyed by the bombs. Frustrated by this partial success, Sterling improvised what would become the SAS's signature tactic. He led the Blitz buggy and 2 of the newly acquired Jeeps directly onto the airfield, driving between the rows of parked aircraft with all guns blazing. Tracer and incendiary rounds from Vickers K guns ripped through wings, fuselages, and fuel tanks. Aircraft that had survived the bomb failures were systematically destroyed by gunfire. The SAS claimed 15 additional aircraft killed by this drive-in attack, bringing the total at Bagush to roughly 37. It was the first vehicle-mounted airfield assault in history, and it demonstrated that the armed Jeep could be even more effective than raiders on foot. Bombs required time to place, and relied on fuses that might fail. Guns delivered their destruction instantly and reliably. The tactic was perfected 3 weeks later in the most famous SAS raid of the Desert War. On the night of the 26th to 27th of July 1942, 18 armed Jeeps, carrying approximately 60 British and Free French commandos, assembled for an attack on Sidi Haneish airfield. The force was led by Sterling personally, with Paddy Mayne commanding one of the Jeep columns. They departed their hideout at Bir El Qusair in the late afternoon and covered 50 miles of open desert, navigating by sun compass and then by stars as darkness fell. The navigator was Mike Sadler, a long-range desert group veteran who had transferred to the SAS and who would later be described as the finest desert navigator of the war. As the column approached the airfield perimeter around 10 o'clock in the evening, something unexpected happened. The runway lights suddenly switched on, illuminating rows of parked aircraft. For a moment, the raiders feared they had been detected. Then they realized the truth. A Luftwaffe bomber was coming in to land, and the ground crew had lit up the field for the approach. The SAS had arrived at precisely the right moment. At approximately 15 minutes past 10, Sterling fired a green Very flare, the signal to attack. The 18 Jeeps charged onto the airfield in a V formation, 9 vehicles in each column, with gunners on each side firing outward at the parked aircraft. The noise was deafening. Tracer rounds carved bright lines through the darkness. Aircraft exploded as incendiary bullets found fuel tanks. German and Italian ground crew ran in all directions, some toward defensive positions, most simply fleeing the chaos. The attack lasted approximately 15 minutes. The SAS claimed 37 to 40 Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed, including Junkers 87 Stuka dive bombers, Junkers 52 transport aircraft, and Messerschmitt 109 fighters. However, German records examined after the war indicate the actual number was closer to 20 aircraft destroyed or badly damaged. Even this lower figure represented a stunning achievement. The SAS lost 1 man killed in the attack itself. Lance Bombardier John Robson, 21 years old, was shot through the head while manning his machine gun. He was the only Allied casualty of the assault proper. The withdrawal did not go as smoothly. As dawn approached, the French SAS element, which had been assigned to a secondary target, found itself behind schedule. Tire punctures on the rough desert surface had slowed their progress, and they were caught in the open at first light by 4 German Stukas. The aircraft made repeated strafing runs on the exposed jeeps. 2 vehicles were destroyed. Aspirant André Zernheld, a French paratrooper and philosopher who had written poetry about war and faith, was hit in the shoulder and abdomen. He died approximately 13 hours later, surrounded by his comrades. His notebook, recovered after his death, contained a prayer that began with the words, "I bring before thee, Lord, the souls of the soldiers who are about to die." It would become the official prayer of the French airborne forces. Simultaneous and near-simultaneous raids compounded the damage inflicted that July. On the same night as the Bagouche raid, French SAS teams attacked Foucault airfield while Maine hit Al-Daba. A second raid on Foucault later in July destroyed more enemy bombers. July 1942, alone, likely saw 75 to 85. Axis aircraft claimed destroyed by SAS jeep raids, though confirmed kills were lower. By this point in the campaign, Sterling could report to Middle East headquarters that the SAS had claimed destruction of at least 143 Axis aircraft in just 6 months of operations. Even accounting for the tendency of raiding forces to overcount their kills, the impact was unmistakable. The unit that headquarters had tried to strangle at birth was now producing results that could not be ignored. The cumulative effect of SAS raids provoked an increasingly desperate Axis response. Field Marshal Rommel reportedly stated that Sterling and his men caused him more harm and damage than any other unit of similar size within Allied forces. Sterling earned the nickname the Phantom Major, though sources dispute whether it was coined by German intelligence or the British press. The Germans implemented escalating countermeasures. Airfield security was dramatically increased. Guard posts were established around aircraft dispersal areas. Patrols were mounted at all hours. The problem was that these security measures required troops, and troops assigned to guard rear area airfields were troops not available for the front lines. This was precisely the force-multiplying effect Sterling had predicted in his original memorandum. A few dozen SAS raiders were tying down hundreds of Axis soldiers. Maine noted grimly after one raid that the enemy had posted a sentry on nearly every plane, but even this measure was not sufficient. Maine simply knifed the sentries before placing his bombs. Axis intelligence also attempted more sophisticated countermeasures. They deployed a spy, the Anglo-Swiss fascist Theodore Sturch, who posed as a captured British officer in prisoner of war camps to extract information from captured SAS men. A former French Foreign Legionnaire named Herbert Bruckner, who had joined the SAS under false pretenses, betrayed upcoming raid plans to the Germans. Operations against airfields at Derna and Martuba failed as a result, the targets having been evacuated before the raiders arrived. The most significant response came from the highest levels of the Nazi regime. On the 18th of October 1942, Adolf Hitler personally issued the Commando Order, known in German as the Kommandobefehl. Distributed in only 12 copies and classified as top secret, the order stated that all commandos operating against German forces were to be annihilated to the last man, regardless of whether they wore proper military uniforms or attempted to surrender. The commando order was motivated significantly by SAS operations, along with other commando raids such as the Dieppe Assault and Operation Basalt in the Channel Islands. It was a war crime, a violation of the laws of armed conflict that had protected prisoners of war since the 19th century. At the Nuremberg trials after the war, General Alfred Jodl was found guilty in part for his role in distributing and implementing the order. In June 1942 alone, the SAS claimed to have destroyed an estimated 8% of all German aircraft in North Africa, a staggering proportion for a unit of fewer than 200 men. Even if this figure was exaggerated, even if the actual percentage was half that, the strategic impact was immense. Estimating total aircraft destroyed by the SAS during the North African campaign requires navigating significant discrepancies between sources. The most rigorous academic figure comes from Alan Vick's Rand Corporation study titled Snakes in the Eagle's Nest, which documented 367 aircraft destroyed by all British Special Forces combined in the theatre. This includes not just the SAS, but also the Special Boat Service, the Long Range Desert Group, and agents of the Special Operations Executive. Other historians have produced higher estimates. Author Damian Lewis, citing operational records in an interview with the Imperial War Museums, offered 387 proven and approximately 450 probable destructions attributed to the SAS specifically. Conservative estimates begin around 250. The highest claims exceed 400. SAS overcounting was common and understandable. At Agadabiya, the unit claimed 37 aircraft destroyed, while Axis records indicate approximately 25. At Sidi Haneish, the SAS claimed 37 to 40, while German documentation shows closer to 20. Men attacking an airfield at night, with bombs and bullets and fire everywhere, naturally overestimated the damage they inflicted. Aircraft already unserviceable might not be counted as losses in Axis records, even if physically destroyed. Both sides had reasons to distort the numbers. What cannot be disputed is that a unit, never exceeding a few hundred men, inflicted damage equivalent to a conventional air wing, at negligible cost in men and materiel. The claim that the SAS destroyed more enemy aircraft than the Royal Air Force did in air combat during the same period is broadly accepted by the Imperial War Museums and multiple historians, though it may hold most precisely for specific months of 1942 rather than the entire campaign. Reg-seekings represented another side of the SAS, the working-class backbone that balanced the aristocratic officers and celebrated warriors. Born on the 19th of March 1920 near Ely in Cambridgeshire, the son of a farm labourer, Seekings had enlisted in the army despite being almost completely blind in one eye. Regulations should have barred him from service entirely, but he had memorized the eye chart and fooled the medical examiners. An original member of L Detachment, Seekings, survived Operation Squatter and participated in 10 major raids during the North African campaign. He personally claimed destruction of more than 15 aircraft and rose from private to squadron sergeant major through merit and survival. He earned both the Distinguished Conduct Medal and the Military Medal, decorations normally awarded for extraordinary valor. Historians would later describe him as the great unsung hero of the wartime SAS and the power behind the thrones of Stirling and Maine. The end of Stirling's personal war came on the 24th of January 1943 in southern Tunisia. The SAS commander was leading a raiding party deep into enemy territory, attempting to become the first 8th Army unit to link up with 1st Army forces advancing from the west. Even Brigadier George Davey had warned him he was pushing too close to the enemy, taking too many risks on too little intelligence. The warning proved prescient. Stirling's party was detected by German patrols and forced to scatter. Stirling himself escaped the initial contact and found refuge among local Arab tribesmen. According to SAS tradition, these Arabs then sold his location to the Germans in exchange for goods or money. He escaped once from German custody, but was recaptured by Italian forces and flown to Rome for interrogation. Stirling proved as resistant to captivity as he had been to authority. He made at least 4 escape attempts from various prisoner of war camps, once getting within miles of Switzerland before being recaptured. Eventually, the Germans transferred him to Colditz Castle, the fortress in Saxony classified as escape-proof, where the most persistent Allied escapers were concentrated. Stirling spent the remainder of the war there, serving as chief of the escape committee and planning breaks that other men would execute. His capture initially sparked fears that the SAS would be disbanded. The unit had been so closely identified with its founder that many assumed it could not survive without him. Instead, Paddy Mayne assumed command on the 27th of January 1943 and led the unit through the remainder of the North African campaign. Under Mayne's leadership, the SAS participated in the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, spearheading the assault at Capo Muro di Porco. David's brother, Bill Sterling, raised the 2nd SAS Regiment in Algeria in May 1943, doubling the unit's strength. By September 1942, even before Sterling's capture, General Auchinleck had already granted the SAS full regimental status, the ultimate vindication of a concept that military bureaucrats had tried to strangle at birth. Paddy Mayne himself survived the war, though not by much. He was killed in a car accident in Northern Ireland in 1955, driving home from a late night out. His wartime decorations included the Distinguished Service Order with 3 bars, making him one of the most decorated British soldiers of the conflict. Even King George VI had inquired why the Victoria Cross had so strangely eluded him. The answer probably lay in Mayne's difficult personality and his history of conflict with superior officers. Valour alone was never sufficient for Britain's highest military honour. Field Marshal Montgomery is said to have remarked that the boy Sterling is quite mad. Quite mad. However, in a war there is often a place for mad people. Whether Montgomery actually said this has never been definitively confirmed, but the sentiment captures something true about how the military establishment viewed the SAS and its founder. The commander of United States Delta Force, the American Special Operations Unit that traces its lineage directly to SAS methods and traditions, later wrote to Sterling with more respect. The common bond between the special forces of the Western world is that we all trace our roots back to you. The SAS's North African campaign represents one of military history's most striking examples of asymmetric warfare before that term existed. A unit conceived by a lieutenant whom the establishment considered an undisciplined gambler, opposed by the very headquarters meant to support it, and nearly destroyed in its first operation, went on to inflict strategic-level damage with tactical-level resources. The core irony is inescapable. The vehicle that made British Special Forces deadly in the desert was not British at all. The Willys Jeep was designed in America, manufactured in Toledo, Ohio, and shipped across the Atlantic as part of Lend-Lease. It was intended as a simple utility vehicle, a way to move personnel and cargo around military installations. No one at Willys Overland or at the United States Army had imagined it bristling with machine guns and racing across enemy airfields at night. The marriage of this humble American vehicle with surplus British aircraft machine guns created a weapons system that no military planner had envisioned. British ingenuity, American manufacturing, and the vast empty spaces of the North African desert combined to produce something unprecedented. The armed Jeep became not just a raiding platform but a symbol of unconventional thinking, of the willingness to improvise, adapt, and overcome that defined the SAS from its founding. What began as 66 men and a stolen piano in a desolate camp on the Great Bitter Lake became the blueprint for every special operations unit that followed. The descendants of L Detachment now serve in the special forces of every Western nation and many others besides. They carry different weapons and drive different vehicles, but they operate according to principles that David Sterling, Jock Lewis, and Paddy Mayne developed in the Egyptian desert more than 80 years ago. The Willys Jeep has long since passed into history, replaced by purpose-built special operations vehicles with armor, night vision, and satellite navigation. But every one of those modern vehicles owes something to the sand-colored raiders that charged onto Sidi Haneish airfield on a July night in 1942, guns blazing, proving that a handful of determined men with the right equipment and the right mindset could change the course of a war.
When I enlisted in the Marine Corps, it took me a while to get used to being in the military, because some of the most mundane things that we did as part of the job, well, initially they seemed very strange to me. One of those things was the idea of going to the field. My first thought was that we were literally going to an actual field, just setting up tents in an open grassy area and living outside for a few days. But since there would be work involved, it would be like camping with extra steps. I guess that's not exactly wrong, but we never had tents. Being recon, we spent the entire time doing patrols and just roughing it out in the jungle, like Mowgli. And even if we did sleep in tents at times, most people would pick nice, safe, dry spots to set up their tents when they go camping, right? The military doesn't do that. Well, maybe the Air Force does because, well, they go camping at the Hilton. But when I reached my first duty station in Hawaii, going to the field meant packing up a week's worth of food, water, fuel, batteries, our rifles, all of our personal gear, radios, and so on. And then we would drive in military vehicles in convoy fashion on the highway, or hop on a helicopter and go from our base to one of several military training installations on the island, most of which were covered in thick jungle. Going to the field therefore means something different depending on where any given unit is located in the world. For instance, Hawaii was often windy, rainy, and miserable at night, but besides the centipedes, there wasn't much animal life out there in the jungle that would bother you. And they do bite and they're very painful, but other than that, there wasn't really much out there. Going to the field on Camp Pendleton in California meant you might run into a rattlesnake or two and probably stick yourself with a few cacti when you're walking around out in the desert at night. But the following two stories, one from a Marine conducting training in the mountains of Northern California, and the other from a National Guardsman training in the Wisconsin mountains east of the Mississippi River, well, I'm not sure I have any idea what they encountered, especially as they indicate if it wasn't human. This is the Smoke Pit, and these are true stories submitted by fellow service members. Stories about encounters that they had with something that is collectively known as a pale crawler, a rake. Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, Bridgeport, California. This story was emailed to me earlier this year by a young Marine whose name I have chosen to keep anonymous, mostly because he is still active duty and I don't want his command or anyone else to catch wind of this and berate him for sharing this bizarre story and associating his command with it, or to otherwise draw any unwanted attention on him publicly. He writes, "My name is Corporal Oscar with the United States Marine Corps, and I have a story I'd like to share with you from our platoon's time in Bridgeport for mountain training exercise. A couple years ago, from September to October, our platoon Alpha 2 of 1st CEB Combat Engineer Battalion went to Bridgeport for a joint exercise with our Victor Unit 2-1. Before we got there, we were briefed back on Camp Pendleton about things like high-altitude pulmonary anemia and how the oxygen difference with the altitude could cause hallucinations. We also heard other strange stories about the training area, such as people sometimes waking up right as Marine animal packers, Marines patrolling with horses and donkeys, would unexpectedly walk through the middle of the patrol bases at night because the animal packers course used the same training area. Anyway, when we got to Bridgeport's lower base camp, we were given 2 days to acclimatize our bodies to the altitude. In that time, we explored the surrounding mountains, and we may or may not have climbed up mountains we weren't supposed to and taken some cool pictures. The strange activities, though, started around 2 weeks into Bridgeport. We'd always make jokes about skinwalkers coming by and grabbing us in the middle of the night, but something did actually show up. Yo, Rambo, put your damn knife away and help me get these tarps up.
All right, but one, it's a bayonet. And two, you gotta admit this thing is pretty damn cool. Look at this thing.
How much you pay for that thing anyway?
$250.
Damn, bro. Seriously? Did it come with a Camaro and 29% financing?
Whatever, man. This thing is awesome. I mean, it's a classic.
Just help me get the damn tarps up, will you?
All right, all right.
One night during an operation we called the COOL, C-O-O-L, I'm not sure what it stands for, probably Combat Operations, something. We were at Bridgeport's highest landing zone, LZ Owl. We'd set up shelter with our tarps for the night. I should mention this tree, we hooked our tarps on was growing up against a large rock face. I was a Lance Corporal at the time. I had with me one other Lance Corporal, engineer, and Lance Corporal water dog, a water specialist, and we used large rocks like small boulders and wooden stakes to anchor down our tarps to make a pyramid shape against the tree. So one end of the tarps was attached to the tree, and it was like a lean-to kind of built around the entire perimeter of this tree, so any water would roll off and keep our gear and us dry underneath. Another thing of note, the water dog we had with us would often be messing around with his rifle because he had a bayonet with him, and he'd stick it on the end of his rifle. He liked playing with it, he liked showing it off. So once night came and the freezing snow started falling, we went under our tarps and into our sleeping bags. This was around 9 p.m. I woke up around 10 p.m. to the sound of someone racking the charging handle of their weapon back. It's dead quiet up there. And we're supposed to be in a tactical environment, so making unnecessary noises like that is going to piss somebody off. So I look around, and me and my other engineers' M4s were on the ground next to us, and only the water dog's rifle was around the backside of the tree, where only he could see it.
Rambo, you awake?
It was dark,
Yeah.
and so I figure
What's up?
it's this guy. He must be screwing around with his bayonet again.
Is that you?
So I asked him if that was him messing with his rifle.
No. Wasn't me.
He gets up out of his sleeping bag and tells me that it wasn't him. So now I'm thinking that someone, maybe one of the infantry guys that we're training with, has snuck up to our patrol base and is messing with us. So I pull out my K-bar and I crawl out from under the tarps. I'm gonna go threaten some poor guy who thinks he's gonna scare us, right? But there was nobody else nearby.
What the hell?
Hey, Oscar,
Yes, Sergeant.
what the hell are you doing?
I heard a noise. Did you hear like a rifle or something?
Yeah, is that you guys?
No, Sergeant.
What's with the knife?
I came out because I thought it might be one of the infantry guys or something.
Yeah, okay. Let me go ask the fire watch, see if they're screwing around. God.
So when I came out, my sergeant, he sees me coming up out of our lean-to, and he walks up to me and asks me what the hell I'm doing, standing there holding a knife and all. And I asked if he'd heard the noise that we did. And he said that he did, thinking it was one of us racking our rifles, which I told him it wasn't. So then he walks over to the nearby infantrymen on fire watch, and he asks if he or his guys were screwing around with their rifles. But that guy also knew nothing about it. So our sergeant comes back up and tells us that, and says to just go back to sleep. So I went back in my sleeping bag, and I forget all about it. Next time I woke up was 6 a.m., reveille. But now, our tarps are all on the ground, like something had pulled them down off the tree. And the small boulders we used to hold them down, they are nowhere to be found. And the stakes, same story, gone. So, as we're trying to figure out what had happened with our tarps, our sergeant comes back up and tells us what he saw earlier that night. He said he didn't mention it because he thought he was seeing things at the time. But after he told us to go back to sleep, and I had crawled back into my sleeping bag, my sergeant said something caught his eye up at the top of the rock face behind us. And so he looks up and he sees this bald, naked, human-looking figure with shining eyes, looking over from on top of the rock face. And as soon as he spotted it, he said he saw it duck away immediately. My first thought was a video I'd seen of a guy who was filming his house because he thinks there's a skinwalker or rake around his house. And when he sees it on top of his roof as he's filming it, as soon as he saw it, this thing also ducks behind the house and disappears. So, again, my sergeant thought he was just seeing things. So he said he just went back to bed as well. But now, with the tarps being messed with, I guess he thought he should tell us about it. We don't know what it was. Maybe somebody was messing with us. But I think we would have heard them moving around if it was a person. Whatever it was far more disciplined in silence than any infantryman or Marine that I've ever met. I have a few pictures here as proof of our time in Bridgeport, if necessary. Well, brother, I don't know what your sergeant saw either, but at least all it did was just mess with your gear. At least it didn't steal any of it. I mean, imagine trying to explain that to Sif. What happened to your tarp? It was stolen by a rake. Uh-huh. Yeah, right. But as horrible as this is to acknowledge, and this is the reason that there's an episode for this, and there will be at least another one or maybe two in future because of the amount of stories I have, you are not the only person training out in the field to see something like this. I've got several more of these encounter stories from here in the US, and even a couple from some active soldiers. I think one was a British soldier, and I think a German soldier training in Germany. A hairless, decrepit Bigfoot, maybe? A curious alien? Only God knows, since it's not in any of the science books I've read. But since you didn't mention having any theories about the source of the noise you heard, which you and your sergeant both seem to identify as the charging handle on someone's M4, I did have one theory about that. These things, when they are sighted, are occasionally said to be excellent tree climbers. And since the sound woke you up, rather than it's not as if you were sitting there listening and you heard it, it was a sound that woke you up, I thought maybe what you took to be the sound of a charging handle, which sounds like this, might have otherwise been this sound, which is the sound of a branch breaking. The two noises seemed close enough to me that if your sergeant's eyes weren't lying to him, maybe this thing was up in the tree above you, and it scrambled down when it saw your sergeant or another Marine walking closer, breaking a branch in its haste to get out of the tree. Whatever it was, that's just one good reason that we still keep Firewatch, even when we're in training. Stay frosty out there, guys. Fort McCoy, Wisconsin.
All right, ladies, let's go. Hurry up and plot your points. The faster you get out there, the faster you're going to get done. Unless you're not prior enlisted, then there's not really much hope for you. Officers are notoriously bad at land nav. But
This next story was submitted by a National Guardsman to the Phantoms and Monsters website. He writes, I want to share an experience I had while training with my National Guard unit at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. I moved from enlisted to officer via ROTC and was attached to a unit in my prospective MOS while in the program. I don't really want to give specifics on my service as the community is small enough to identify me to my peers. In 2014, my platoon decided to conduct nighttime land navigation at Fort McCoy from 2030 to 0030 in the morning. While the Army is typically all about buddy pairs, night land navigation is one of the few cases we get to do things solo, because the whole point is to check that the individual soldier is qualified to do it without help. So I step off on my plotted route with my compass, my map, and headlamp in hand. For those who do not know, land nav involves finding these engineering stakes, these markers, on a course by plotting their coordinates on a map and then walking from point to point using various map reading techniques, terrain association, and, of course, a compass. At night, this is typically done without light as much as possible. When light is used, your flashlight, it's a red lens. This minimizes the impact on our night vision. Ostensibly, these methods also keep you concealed in a tactical environment, if you were actually doing this in a real combat scenario, along with practicing noise discipline, so it's all part of the training. So I was moving through the woods while making a token effort to be difficult to spot or hear. The woodland I was in was part of a larger forest system, but was frequently traveled. That night we had some 15 soldiers clomping around in the woods. My source of light was a headlamp that toggled between a red and white light. I had it set up initially so that the red light was the first light to turn on. So you turn it on, it's red, you turn it off, you turn it back on. After a couple seconds, it's still red. Because to cycle the white light, I would have to turn it off twice. So if you've used a headlamp like this, I don't need to explain it to you, but for those that are not familiar, when you cycle this headlamp, it starts on solid white. You turn it off, you turn it back on immediately, it changes to flashing white. You turn it off immediately, right back on, solid red, off again, back on again, flashing red, and then off. And then if you turn it back on, it's back on solid white. Now, I'm not telling you all this for nothing, but I'll explain shortly why that matters. During my initial planning, I saw that my assign points would take me to the other side of the course and back. Good hour-and-a-half distance, at least as the crow flies. A bit longer to actually walk because the terrain goes up and down and you're in the woods at night, you're meandering around trees, moving slowly, trying not to gouge your eyes out on low-hanging branches. But the points I had were more or less in a straight line with one another, so I was just going to hit each one as I walked out into the training area. So I estimated maybe 2.5 hours out and back. I was just going to walk out, hit all my points, and then just walk back after I was done. But I knew if I came back too early, I might be given another set of points. So I resolved to just walk out, take a break for an hour once I was done if I had time, and then mosey on back. The first half of this goes as planned. I get my points without much trouble and wind up sitting on a hillside at around, it's maybe now 10 at night. It's cloudy, but the moon is full, but it's windy, so the clouds are intermittently blocking the illumination from the moon. So I can see pretty well when the sky is clear, but there is like no illume when the cloud cover is too heavy. Occasionally I see a red light bobbing in the distance below me. A pair of my platoon members pass down on the hill in front of me using a white light to read their map, and I startled them when I asked if they needed help because, you're not supposed to be using your white light out there. But by the end of my break, I don't see any more motion in my area. Most people had likely walked out and back, they'd found all their points, or they were too lost and ended up taking one of the roads to get back. So I'm feeling pretty at one with my surroundings. Having sat in the same spot, eating stale Skittles for a good long while, there's owls hooting, trees are swaying, it was nice. I trot down this hill, and I step through some brush, and I'm now in a clearing where this prairie land intersects with forest. There are some dead trees in the area, and one of them is split. It's still standing, and it's split halfway up. At the top of this broken tree, about 15 feet up off the ground, I can make out a distinct head and shoulders silhouette against the clouds which were backlit by the moon. There's enough light coming through that I can still make out this silhouette of this person. So I walk up to ask how the hell they got up there and if they're stuck and they need help. When this shadow twitches and I get the distinct impression it's now turned toward me. I stand there looking at it, and maybe it's looking at me. The situation definitely feels off, but I wasn't about to let a battle buddy punk me. So I asked if they needed a hand.
Hey.
But mid-sentence, the moonlight comes back. And it's immediately clear to me that the thing on that tall stump was not a soldier. This moonlight glimpse is the best look I get at the thing. It looked like a stretched out bald person. Its long arms are clutching the stump. I can't make out the face, but it looks pinched. And by that, I mean I couldn't see its eyes or mouth. Like they were very small and in the middle of the head. It's skinny, like it hasn't eaten. But it's tall and obviously strong enough to have made such a vertical climb on this tree. He was definitely looking at me. Probably was the whole time I was in the clearing, maybe even since I came down the hill. So I swear loudly.
Shit.
And then it rapidly scurries down the trunk. I flick my red light on, and I catch it on all fours, moving toward the brush line in the direction I'm heading. And automatically I keep toggling the lamp to be in the white light. That means it goes off, then to flashing red, then to back on, then finally to white. So in the flash, as I scramble to get my damn headlamp working, I see the thing at the wood line, but I think it's flipped itself around and is backing in to the tree line, probably to keep its eyes on me. And in the few seconds it takes for me to get to the white light, it's gone. I scan the tree line, which is now silent. When it moved, there was a scraping noise. Plus, the woodland brush was dense. If it was still running, I would hear it. So I reasoned that it must have stopped moving, and it must still be watching me. So I fumbled to get my knife out, and I keep looking around the woods in front of me. And after what felt like ages, I start inching along a perpendicular path to my initial route of travel, an angle that will link me up with the hardball road that runs up and down the side of the training course. And once on the road, I figure I can just take that road back to where my platoon is parked. My major problem is that the road is 10 minutes of walking from my current position, and it's mostly woodland. That can't be helped. I have to get out of this clearing first. And my progress on that front is painfully slow because I'm just trying to keep my eyes on where I think this thing still is. And the whole time I am fighting this kind of natural urge to just freeze in place and not move. After sidestepping about a good 10 meters, I hear a corresponding rustling, and I think I see movement. That was enough to get me to just turn and bolt right into a downed log, which trips me. I scramble back up to my feet, and I look back to the woodline where there is an audible commotion. I glimpse an emaciated leg and an ass moving back into the woods. And at this point, I am done with the whole situation, but I don't want to run again and keep tripping. So I start power walking to the road, trying to look as much as I can over my left shoulder to see what this thing is doing. And over the movement of my own kit, I can hear it moving alongside me, parallel. And as I near the end of the clearing, I think I hear it picking up pace, as if to cut me off before I enter the tree line. I made the decision to sprint, and when I enter the woods, my path is clear, but I'm pretty sure I can still hear it moving along with me in my periphery. I don't stop. I'm just running hard until I hit that paved road. And I ate it pretty hard a few times, tripping over stuff in the woods, but I just kept frantically getting back up and running. And once I'm on the road, I just ran until I couldn't hear it. I didn't think I could hear it anymore. So now I'm winded from this dead-out run for I don't know however many minutes. And from the middle of the road, I had pretty good visibility, so I decided to walk, try to catch my breath. It's quiet for a while, and then I hear a branch move. It had to be about 30 feet in the air from the woods on the side of the road that I had just run out of. I snap my gaze up, and I see this pale, oval-shaped face, this ovular face, half in shadow, peeking at me from around the trunk of a tree, way up on the tree. I took off again, and I did not stop. And after what felt like way too long, I finally make it back. I see the headlights of our LMTVs, and I check my watch, and it was 12:15.
What happened, cadet? Did you get lost out there? Why are you're covered in mud? Did you fall down? Why are you out of breath?
I got lost. On my way back. I got lost.
You gonna be okay?
I'm fine.
I knew better than to tell them that I saw what I saw. A monster, basically. In the years since drilling at FMC, I have never experienced anything like that again. McCoy does not have a history of disappearances, as far as I know. Neither do the two closest towns, Sparta and Toma. I've done night land navigation alone a few times since without issue. But this is less from courage, and more from me just deciding to think that, maybe I just misinterpreted the situation and what I was seeing. But then again, maybe the world is weirder than I previously thought. Now, a story where a lieutenant claims to understand land navigation and says that he found all of his grid points before everyone else. That is a story I would find questionable. Most officers would still be out there wandering around right now. But since this guy was a former enlisted soldier who then transitioned to become an officer, his proficiency at land navigation checks out. In all seriousness, this is one of those stories that gives me the heebie-jeebies just reading it. I cannot imagine the anxiety of actually living through this experience. Everything you read online typically says that the existence of these creatures is entirely fictional, these rakes or pale crawlers. That it's all just some sort of creepypasta that was invented in the last couple decades. So either these two guys and everybody else are just pulling our legs for a laugh, or there is something weird skulking around the mountains and forests. As I said, these are not the only stories I've received so far, and quite possibly, these two are not even the most terrifying. If I was somebody living near the woods, I would keep my doors and windows locked at night. And if you're out training in the field, don't fall asleep on fire watch. Hey guys, so don't have much to add as far as additional comments on these stories, but because I poke so much fun at the officers being bad at land nav, I did want to maybe justify that by sharing one of my own personal experiences with this very common military trope about particularly lieutenants being bad at land navigation. So my 6-man team, my recon team, we were in Guam. We were attached to the 31st MEU. This was a training mission that we were doing in Guam. We had been sent out into this godless jungle, some of the nastiest stuff I've ever walked through. And our whole objective was to get observation and radio collection on an enemy, a location where there was enemy activity. It was like a weapons cache. There were buildings. They had role players that were moving in and out. And ultimately it culminated with a high-value target that was going to be on site that we reported. And then the raid force was going to come in and kick the doors in, kill everybody, snatch the bad guy, the whole thing. So the 3 days go by, we send up all our reports, the raid force is coming in. Our next objective is to meet the raid force at a rally point because they're going to pick us up and extract us. That's our ride out. So under the cover of darkness, we move to the rally point and we're sitting in the middle of this field, dead tired, waiting for these guys to show up. And several hours go by and we don't know where they are. And after a while, finally they do show up and they drive right past us. just blow right past us. And I knew they were going in the wrong direction. So we're like, what the hell's going on? They do have to turn around. It was just the most embarrassing thing to see because these giant trucks are on this little tiny dirt road with an embankment on both sides. So they have to do like this 350-point turn just to get all of these, I don't know, maybe 10 trucks turned around and then start moving in the other direction. It was just really clumsy. So finally they come back to where we are. They stop to pick us up. And of course, perfect timing as always. Here comes this torrential wall of rain as we're sprinting to the trucks to try to stay. We've been dry for 3 days. We do not want to get wet at the last second. So we clamber into the back of the 7-ton, throw our gear up. We manage to stay dry. And now we're just chilling in the back of this truck. Our mission is done. But the convoy doesn't go anywhere. And as I'm sitting there dead tired, I haven't slept in 2 days, I hear this kind of fierce conversation going on outside the tarp. And it's a sergeant talking to somebody else, one of the other team leaders or his ATL, something like that. The lieutenant doesn't know where we are, was the gist of the conversation that I was hearing. And the next thing I heard was a command being passed down the whole line of trucks, everybody out. All the infantry guys were going to unload, get your kits on, get your rifles ready. We're going to move to the raid site from here, where we just stopped on the road. Now, I was the navigator for my team. I had studied this map very well. I was familiar with the training area. We'd walked around it. I knew where we were, and I knew where the enemy was, and I knew this was the worst possible place to unload and move these guys, because there's like a kilometer of solid, nasty jungle. When I say it was the worst jungle I ever patrolled through, it wasn't the terrain. Everything was covered in thorns. It was like an acupuncture treatment just walking. It was horrible. I was so worried about getting my eyes poked out, seriously. And the spiders. I've never seen so many spiders. At night, you can't see them, but the cobwebs, like in my face the whole time at the front of this patrol. And then when daylight came, it was like some ungodly, like the forest in Harry Potter. Unbelievably terrifying amount of spiders. The Guam has like some really bad problem with spiders apparently, and they're huge. But anyway, I knew that these infantry guys, there was a platoon-sized element plus gonna move through this jungle in any short amount of time, no. So I'm sitting there in the truck, kind of mulling this over as I hear all these guys getting ready to step off. And this is one of the points in my career where I can say something, save these guys a bunch of hassle, or I could just stay nice and comfortable in the truck and warm. Well, my conscience got the better of me. I hopped out of the truck, immediately got soaked, walked up to the front. I'm asking guys up the line like, hey, who can I talk to? Who's in charge here? Who's the navigator? La da 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 da. I get pointed up to the very front, lead vehicle. There's a lieutenant and a sergeant looking over this map. So I go up to them and I just kind of interject in their conversation. Excuse me, gentlemen. And they're like, oh yeah, who are you? What do you want? And I said, well, I'm the navigator for the recon team. My name is Sergeant Lamana. Are you guys planning on stepping off from here? And the lieutenant's like, yeah, so I'm looking at this map here and the enemy site is just north of us from where we are. So we're just gonna basically cut through this brush line right here, this wood line. And we'll be at the enemy in like 15 minutes. Now, he hasn't patrolled through this jungle. I have. It's going to take like 3 hours. So I tell them that, and I explain how horrible the jungle is, and the sergeant is now looking at me like, bro, please help us. Tell us where to go. This man has no idea what he's doing. So I just say, look, if you guys just drive straight down this road, about half a click, and then take a left from there, and then another kilometer to the north, you are right on top of the enemy. You do not have to send your guys through this ungodly jungle. Lieutenant looks at his sergeant seems to agree. He looks at me, he's like, okay, yeah, everybody load back up. They load everybody back up, and the sergeant asks me offline, he grabs me, he's like, bro, can you please sit in the lead vehicle with the lieutenant and tell the driver where to go? So I go back and I tell my team leader, hey, I'm gonna be sitting up in the lead truck for the rest of this mission. I tell the driver, literally, it was what I said. Just drive down the road. There's a turn coming up to the left. And I say, hey, just take this left-hand turn. And the driver's like cursing and muttering under his breath. He's like, bro, we passed this thing 3 times. And so we take the left-hand turn. And sure enough, they stop just short of the enemy. They unload and never have to walk through any jungle. They just walk right up this nice road and hit the enemy. Guns blasting, people screaming. End of story, mission accomplished. So, yeah. I have more experiences like that, but that was one of the funnier ones that came to mind when I thought about lieutenants and land navigation. So thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much to my Patreon and YouTube channel members. It is the holiday season, so God bless all of you and your families. Stay safe if you're traveling. If you're having a rough time this holiday season, it's not perfect for everyone. So I just I do pray that God will be with you no matter what you are dealing with. You will make it through it. And I will see you in the next episode.